I've started to read Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Um, I'm currently on chapter 3 of book 1, and I wanted to give my first impressions. I think Malazan is something I've been considering reading for for like 20 years now, maybe. I've known of it for a very long time, and I've been like on the absolute edge of considering reading it probably like 5 or 6 times where I've actually said like I'm going to read it, and then rather than just getting the book and reading it, I start to like look at reviews and see what people are saying about it to make sure that I really want to read it. And then I always end up reading like one specific post or review that makes me say no, I don't want to get into this. um and I eventually, though, like this last time, I was thinking like I really like Wheel of Time. But the thing is, I'm listening to that on audiobook with my kid, and so I can only listen to it when we're in the car together, basically. There's a lot of times I want to read something or listen to an audiobook that he's not there. um, and I wanted a second like really long fantasy series that I could just go to whenever that happens. And so this seemed like a good candidate, and I started it. Um, Now, given that like I'm not listening to it super frequently, although I might start listening to it like when I'm just by myself in my room or something, because it has started to click for me a little bit. I will say though, between the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3, they're all very long. Like these are not like, chapter 1 isn't like a few pages. It's not, and these are audiobooks, so I'll talk about length rather than pages. But I want to say the prologue was at least an hour. It felt like chapter 1 was quite long. Um, and I actually right now I can't remember if I just started chapter 3 or if I just finished it. But I think I've been listening for like 3 or 4 hours. It's been quite a few hours of listening, and it's a truly first impression. I'm not going to avoid spoilers because I'm at the very beginning of the story. Um, I like it so far. This is like the broad stroke impression, is that I like it so far. The prose is quite good, more or less. The world building definitely feels good. Um, Characterization is harder for me to say so far. My initial like guess is that it's probably good. There hasn't been any like, um, I haven't seen any really egregious examples of like things that sometimes when I start reading a book, I'll see an author do something and just kind of think to myself like, oh man, I do not trust this person to like carry this through. Um, and I haven't seen any indicators of that so far in Malazan. Um, I think what I've so far liked the most about it is that it really does have the feeling of a real world with real people in it that is definitely extremely fantasy coded. I was thinking about this. I've been also watching season 3 of House of the Dragon, which I've actually quite liked, by the way. I mean, House of the Dragon has, it's not a perfect show by any means, but I've enjoyed it a lot for what it is. But I was thinking about how House of the Dragon really barely feels like fantasy. Setting the dragons aside, I mean, it's kind of, the dragons are so central to the entire plot and the structure of that civil war, and just everything. Like they are, you really cannot set the dragons aside. But setting the dragons aside, it barely feels like fantasy. And sometimes I feel like the most fantasy element of House of the Dragon is actually just the fact that it's like a medieval setting, which isn't our world, and you have these really deeply developed cultures and and like houses and lineages that are not anything that we actually have, and they feel real. And that's really the most deeply developed element of R.R. Martin's writing, is that he's really good at making you believe these long histories and family trees. But as far as the actual fantasy elements, there's not really that much going there. It's more behind the scenes, implied. Like people call that low fantasy sometimes. Um, so far though, like Malazan has felt like really feels high fantasy is kind of the wrong word, because I think high fantasy usually implies like elves and elegant, um, clean things happening, kind of. But this is more like, I don't know what I would call it, like dark high fantasy, where it definitely has all of the fantasy elements feel generally quite like they're like evil things or arcane things or obscure things. It's not like a situation like where the magic is creating a utopia, or it's being used to make everyday life easier for people. It's not that kind of thing. It's more like my sense is like the magic and the fantasy elements are these like unknown things that people know are real, but nobody really quite understands, and they're not really controllable, and there's a lot of like question marks around them. And I think so far I'm really impressed with the way Erickson is handling that. Um, and I'm kind of circling toward my, I don't even want to say negative or criticisms. Like this is a first impression, and everything I'm saying is subject to change as the story like clicks more for me and I understand what he's doing more, and I get a feeling for like the overall plot. Um, but what I would say negative, let's not even say negative, but just as like a part of my strongest overall impression, is that I often have no idea what's happening. Um, and this is like kind of a neutral point, I would say. Like it certainly seems the intention of Erickson that you're not supposed to know what's happening. I think that kind of helps a lot. Like sometimes you read, Gene Wolfe is a good example of this, where you read Gene Wolfe and a lot of times you don't really know what's happening, but you have the impression that you're just not smart enough to know what's happening. It's like, and Wolfe just kind of like expects you to get it, and you're like, well, I guess I have to read this like 3 more times to really get it. Whereas with Erickson, I feel it's like just an intentional decision from him to say, you're not going to know what's happening, and that's what makes the world feel more realistic in a sense. Like I'm dropping you into this very big scene and universe where all of these people have different agendas and all kinds of things are happening, and I'm not gonna do the traditional idea of like having a. I gotta move my dog for a second. Hold on. He's not going to do that thing like the Wheel of Time, or let's say like the archetypical fantasy structure where you have like a simple like a protagonist who is not realizing that they're the chosen one, or that they are, they're an everyman type of character, and then the teaching wizard figure arrives and brings them into this deeper world, and then that kind of functions to get you as the reader. You and let's just like, I'll be less vague about this, let's just compare it to Wheel of Time. You have Moraine, the wizard type lady, arriving, and but before she arrives, you have a very clean, easy to understand situation where you're in the point of view of like some farmer, and he's excited because there's like an archery contest, and they're like, he's excited because there's like a festival and he's gonna dance with girls, right? Like it's very like easy to understand what's going on. And there's a small town and there's a few people, and that's all you know. You don't really need to know anything else. And then the wizard lady arrives, and then they get attacked, and and she rescues them, and then they don't know what's going on, and you know as much as they do, but the extent of not knowing what's going on is kind of just like, why did we get attacked? Where are we going? And then she kind of explains that, and there's some things that she withholds, and you as the reader are kind of like, oh, I wonder what she's not telling them. When I wonder what's really going on. But that structure functions to keep you as the reader fed the right amount of information so that you're slowly discovering the world and the unique ideas of that setting, um, without being overloaded. And so Erickson has said, like, he's not going to do that, and instead you're just going to be dropped in and have straight up no idea what's happening, which is what happened to me. And I didn't read a bunch of, like, I went in blind. I didn't attempt to like read a wiki or something to orient myself. I don't think that would be the right decision. So what I will say about this though is that, like, I wouldn't say that he doesn't like make any effort. Like, obviously if he made no effort at all to get you up to speed or to think about what the reader's going to know as far as what's happening, it would be a total mess. But like, he doesn't do a whole lot. Like, there's really, you really just don't know what's going on a lot of the time. And the prologue, one thing I would probably say is, like, as a tangible critique thus far, is that doing, like, it's a common thing in a fantasy story to do a prologue from a point of view that is not followed through on. Like, you do a POV from like an enemy, like an antagonist that doesn't usually have any POV chapters, but just in the prologue you kind of get a little hint of what they're up to, and then we switch over for the rest of the book to our true POV characters. But if you're going to do this thing that Erickson does where you have no idea what's going on and he doesn't hold your hand at all, and there's no like easing into the world, I think also doing the prologue, which is like I want to say, like, the prologue had one POV was like a main character from chapter 2 30 years ago, or so, like 20 years earlier, as he was a kid, and then we leave him and we don't come back to him for like hours, and then when we get back we like barely remember that he was that kid in that short section of the prologue. And then that prologue was like, so there was so many things like being referenced and dumped during the prologue that you really struggle to know anything at all what's going on. And then to have that, like, do a time jump, but there's no like, I don't think the prologue was like 30 years ago. It might have, I think there's like some, bullshit fantasy timeline, like the year 1762 BA or whatever, just some like year that doesn't register as a meaningful date. And then maybe they mentioned later that this was 30 years later, but good luck remembering what that original date was. So those kind of like time jumps plus POV jumps plus prologue being different tone and POVs than the chapters, what was extremely overwhelming and hard to follow. Another example of this is in the prologue. We get there's a character named Sari, who is like, and by the way, everything I tell you about this, like when I tell you what a character is, what they do, what their name is, don't quote me on this, because I still don't know what's going on in this book. I really don't know what's going on, and anything I say I could be wrong about. So there's a character, Sari, who is like just a random girl, as far as I can tell, in a fishing village. She's immediately, we get into her POV chapter, and she's immediately like accosted by this really old lady who's like a fortune teller of some kind, or maybe a necromancer, I don't know. She says some cryptic stuff that meant nothing to me. I was very confused. I didn't know what was going on. Then two more guys arrive who are some kind of sorcerer, and they, as far as I can tell, they like use some kind of dark magic on her. They summon some kind of demon beast thing that I guess kills everybody. Their names are mentioned, and I forgot what they were. Like if those guys come back, they haven't come back. Is this is kind of my complaint? Those guys have not come back thus far, and I don't remember what their names were. And by the time if they do come back later and they're mentioned by name, I don't know for certain that I would be like, oh, those are those guys. I remember their name. Like I think it's been too long. I won't remember their name, even if I hear it. And then they like do something to her, and she, as far as I can tell, where I am in the story right now, she is maybe not even herself anymore. She's just been replaced by this demon thing that possesses her. And people talk about her in different, various POVs talk about her. She seems very important, but I have no idea what's going on with her. People are afraid of her. They talk about probably needing to kill her maybe, but not yet. We see her sometimes and people are really terrified of her, or they note that things are weird about her, but we never get another. There was a POV chapter of her in the prologue, but we haven't gotten yet another, like so far I haven't seen another POV from her. And I expect that we won't get one actually, which is an example. Like the POV in the prologue is never used again in the book itself. Beyond that, there's the guy who's a kid in the prologue, and then we did a time jump. He's like a merchant that decided to be a soldier. I don't really know what's going on with him, frankly. His father has disowned him. He's got a sister. Despite being a noble and a rich guy, people kind of respect him for some reason, like because he's not coasting on his status, I guess. And he feels like, what I will say about like so far all these characters, they all feel like real people, interesting people, but that's all through this like fog of not knowing what's going on. So it makes it harder. There's a character. I'm going to be really honest with you. There's another character. There's a possibility that there are two separate soldier characters. But it's also possible that I've combined them in my head and there's only one. It's the noble that I mentioned. That's the one. And I just didn't realize it was him until later. Because he had a big POV chapter. A bunch of stuff happened with this first soldier. And he got promoted, and then he got pulled in to do something, and then we go in later and see him, and there's been too much time jumping, and I'm not good at the names, and I can't remember if it's the same guy or not. So there may or may not be two separate male soldier POVs. It might be the same guy. I'm sure that's going to clarify in my head within the next several hours, but right now I don't know. There is a sorceress POV, which that was the most recent POV I got into, and this is what I want to talk the most about. Like, so I've mentioned that I think Erickson's prose is pretty good. I don't have any like hard critiques of like, oh, I hate the way he writes this, or like he's not good at, there's not, I don't sense like this element of like annoying try-harding that I get from like Abercrombie, or the guy who wrote Red Rising, for example. There's not that like grim, dark stink to it that a lot of these books can have, and that's something I really like. I really do like a kind of dark, bleak tone that doesn't end up becoming grim, dark, and cringe. And I think that's really hard to do well. And I think he so far is doing that quite successfully. But what I will notice, and maybe it's just because I've been reading Wheel of Time and I'm contrasting with it, but like, so this sorcerer's character, she wakes up and she mentions that she's been sleeping with this other mage. and they're both together. We get we start, this being like the first sorceress POV. I like, I don't quite, he's doing a really good job like giving you an idea of what magic is and how it works in this series, without like doing the Sanderson thing of just being like, here's my magic system, let me tell you guys about it. It's like a video game. Like, it doesn't feel like that. It feels real in the context of the story, and it feels interesting, and it makes me want to, I'm interested to see what's going to happen with it and what it's going to do and how the author handles it, without going into video game territory, or without making it random stuff happens whenever he feels like it. Those are, usually the two poles you have to watch out for. So the so the sorceress like is with this guy that she's sleeping with, and there's like little world building things built into this, like where it's mentioned that the guy is like hundreds of years old, so we kind of get the feeling that mages live a long time. They're not normal humans. But I will also mention that, like, because I have so little idea of what's going on in the story, it's like, who knows? Like, it's possible later on in the book you realize, like, oh, well, he was 150 years old because he's some weird fantasy race that you didn't realize because you didn't even parse the word as a race when you read it. And those race guys live that long. Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, maybe as I'm assuming that he's old because he's a mage, but that's never spelled out. Further in, I start to get the feeling that, yes, mages live longer because several mages have been mentioned as having lived a very long time, and there has been no mention of non-mages having lived that long. So I do get the feeling they live longer. And it's kind of an example, like, implicit world building, doing it subtly without beating you over the head with it. I have to get my dog again. So in this scene though, like, the mages are like, there's some like magic way that they get signaled by their leader, who's a stronger mage than they are, and they're like, oh, it feels really urgent, we better get going or whatever. And so the thing I want to mention now though is the contrast of Wheel of Time. I started to notice that I never really have a good sense of the environment when I'm reading Erikson so far. Like, it's not that he doesn't describe, it's not that he doesn't give details, it's not that he doesn't like tell you where things are, but it very much is like, so they're in a room. I imagine them being like in a bed in a room. That's about as much as I had from that. Then they go to a tent, which is like the command tent. And I guess this is part of the thing, is like, I don't remember how they got to the command tent. Like, it feels like his blocking isn't what I'm used to, or I'm not like, I haven't adjusted to his blocking. So I'm sorry, my dog just keeps like, I'm just gonna have to ignore him, or this video will have to be scrapped. Like, I'm not used to his blocking, so it was like, where were they? Were they in a building and they went outside? Were they in their own tent? I don't really know, but it kind of was like, I'm listening, and then suddenly they're entering the command tent, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't really know where anything was. And then as they're about to go in the command tent, it's mentioned like, it's mentioned that there's a siege. They're being sieged, or they are sieging, and I actually do not remember which it was. And then it's said that the siege is from a moon, and I don't remember the exact word that was used. I kind of want to Google it, but I'm not going to. It was like dark moon or floating moon or something. It was some adjective plus moon. And then they explained that moon was in the air, that was floating above the city, and that no one could get to it. And I was like, what? Like it was very like, you got to understand, like, when you don't really understand what's happening in the first place, and then you suddenly throw in that there's like a moon floating above the city and it's sieging them, and then a bunch of like truly staggering amount of fantasy words I've never heard before were just dropped on top of me like a bunch of boulders, I guess. And I just didn't process, like I just didn't know what was going on. And so I was like, okay, so this is like a magic floating moon thing. But the problem was, I didn't know, once they mentioned this, I didn't know is it as far away as a real moon? Is it as big as a real moon? If it's sieging them, but they can't get to it, but I don't know what the level of technology is necessarily, like that they couldn't get to it. Is it like, I don't really know how the magic works that they can't get to it. So in my head, like it's in this kind of superposition where it's either maybe it's the size of the moon in orbit around the planet and they can see it and it's exerting magical influence somehow. Maybe it's the size of a large stadium and it's only a few hundred feet in the air. It could be anything between those like poles, right? Maybe it's even smaller than a stadium. Maybe it's the size of a house. Maybe it's a little bit higher. Like I just have no idea. And then they're in the tent, and I'm just like, all right, so there's a moon, something. And then they go into the tent, and there's like 5 more mages in the tent, and the names in this book are like, it's just I just, something about the way they do the names is really hard for me. I have them on the screen because I'll never remember them unless I tell you. But like, for example, the point of view character, the sorceress lady, her name is Tattersail. There's another mage named Tashrin. One is named Quickben. There's a guy named Whiskey Jack. The names are just like, it just, the names like, they just like pass over my brain. I can't ever remember them. It's really hard to follow those kind of names. And so they're in this tent, and suddenly you're just assaulted with all of these names. And this scene in the tent, I don't think there was any description of what the tent looked like. I just know that there are a bunch of talking heads in the tent, and they're kind of arguing with each other. There's a sense of hierarchy. You can tell that various people are higher ranked than others, but if you held a gun to my head and said draw the chain of command, it would probably be wrong. There's a lot of, like, in this scene in the tent, there's a lot of like agendas and implied hidden information, implied hidden agendas, and this is all from Tattersail's point of view. And ultimately, again, you're dropped into a situation where you have no idea what's really going on, and Erickson is not there. There's no like reader proxy character who's as equally as confused as you are, who needs to be brought up to speed. Everybody is deep in this, and you're left to piece it together. Then they start talking about the moon thing, and they're like, yeah, we're gonna attack the moon this morning. Like this is the morning. It's like really early in the morning. They're like, this morning we're gonna attack it. It's time. And then they were like, I just found this really funny. I know I'm like just kind of going all over here, but they were like, somebody, I don't even remember, one of the mages said, but who is the leader of who is the mage, the archmage in charge of the moon? And then someone's like, you all know his name. And it's like, and then someone's like, but what about Chaladin Brood? And so I think Chaladin Brood is like one person's name, but I'm like, is a brood? Is this like a tribe of alien? Is this like, is this like some fantasy monster, a brood of the Chaladins? Or but it's like, no, is Chaladin brood? Is that a human? What is this? And then they start mentioning the word Tista Andi. They're like, that leader of the Archmage of the Tista Andi. And they're like, the Tista Andi? Chaladin brood? And I'm just like, bro, like, I have no idea what's going on anymore. I've completely lost track of everything at this point. And this is, and I want to say this conversation in the tent went on for like 20 minutes of audiobook time of just various mages saying words like Tista Andi and Chaladin brood, and like positioning each other around each other with hidden and withholding information and trying to figure things out and trying to intuit who's angling in what way. And there were implications about and in the background of all of this too, there's like, so far as I've pieced together, there was like an emperor of the Malazan Empire, and he was deposed or died, I don't remember. And now there's an empress, and several of these mages I think worked for the emperor, and then they switched over to the empress. Some of them less enthusiastically than others, and then some of them actually were friends with the empress before she was the empress. I don't really know. And so in this tech conversation, like all of these kind of things are being hinted at and implied and kind of layered in. And it's kind of, it kind of is building up in your subconscious where you have this like feeling. And I what I hope is going to happen is like some way, like halfway through the book, I'll just kind of realize like, oh, okay, I know all of this stuff now. And it was cool that I learned it without being spoon fed it. Right. So then they exit the tent, and again, blocking issue from me, I guess, is that, or my own issue with the blocking is, it felt like they had this incredibly long conversation in the tent, and then the next thing I knew, they were outside and there were like hills, and that each hill had a different mage on it, and I don't know how long it took them to get on the hills, and there was an army. I think there was an army being brought in via a magic tunnel of some kind. I don't know when the army arrived, but there it was at some point. And then suddenly everyone's on the hill, and then Tattersail is on her own hill, and then the moon is spinning and it stops spinning, and then the leader of the Tista Andi and the Flying Moon, his name is Anomander Rake. Like, Chaladin brood, Anomander Rake. These names are just killing me. I think I'll get used to them, but every time they said that, because it's like Anomander Rake, and I'm just like, why is his name Rake? Like, I just don't get it. And like the other thing is Anomander, that name, if that's just his name, whatever, but when you don't understand the fantasy world, naming somebody Anomander Rake, for all I know, an Anomander is a type of like spellcaster. Oh, is he a necromancer or an animander? You know what I mean? And then it's like Anomander Rake, and it's like, Rake, is that like a rake, or is it like he's called Rake because he rakes, or is that just his name? There's a lot of these kind of ambiguities, and you just kind of have to not lock any of them in, and just kind of let it wash over you, I guess. So the moon thing stops spinning, and because like when Anomander Rake steps out, Tattersail can like feel the aura of his power from all the way up, however high that was, I don't know. But now at this point, I'm kind of like calibrating. Okay, but she can see him with her eyes, and she somehow knows that I guess she knows it's Anomander Rake because she can feel the power, not because she can visually confirm that it's him. But because she can at least see him at all, I calibrate like, okay, then this moon must not be that high up, or she couldn't see him. It must just be like a few hundred feet in the air. And then as the scene goes on, I kind of recalibrating, like, it's not really a moon, it's kind of like a floating rock. Maybe it's as big as like a town. I don't really know. And then like Animander Rake like shoots a bunch of ravens out, like magic ravens, and they start like eating people, I guess. Then a bunch of all the mages start shooting magic from the hill up at the moon. At some point, some kind of like necrotic draining magic kills the whole army. And another guy, there's like a fire mage that shoots fire. Somebody gets burned up. A bunch of people just start getting smoked. Tattersail's boyfriend gets killed. And then like, and again, I know this sounds like spoiler, but this is like the very beginning of the story. I think anything after this would probably be spoiler, but I think it's fair game to like just, like whatever. And so then like basically I don't really know what's happening. It's just some crazy shit happening, people dying, it's chaos. But like again, the weird thing is just these like calibrations I'm having to make with this moon, and who is what's going on, why are they on hills, what is the plan, like how are they actually going to win this fight, I don't know. And then the moon, like the impression you get is that basically the POV mages won because the moon retreats, but they don't defeat Animander Rake. He gets away, I guess, and also they lose like their entire army and like a lot of their mages. And mages, it seems that mages are pretty scarce. Like losing one mage is a big deal. So then like this whole thing happens where like Tattersail is kind of like piecing the battle together in her head, and she realizes that like probably this one guy who was supposed to be on her side actually was shooting magic at their own side, and then it's implied like we got to get revenge on him. But as far as I can tell, that guy is still in charge, and I legitimately do not understand that whole angle. Like I don't know at what level he betrayed everybody, if he did betray them, what he specifically did, whether he's still in charge. I also don't understand if I, the reader, am supposed to know that, or if I just missed it and I don't quite get it, but Erickson expects me to. And that's kind of the thread I'm mostly that's kind of my overall first impression, is that like I like it, but everything kind of feels like that, where it's like, okay, well, am I supposed to know what this is yet or not? I guess I'll wait and see, and then, but it's enjoyable, and I guess there's how many books are in the series? Let me check real quick. And is it finished? Oh my god, there's over 25 books. Are you fucking kidding me? I guess the main series is 10 books. Okay, that's cool. Well, I mean, the good thing about this is like if I really like it, then there's a lot to read. But I would really hope that, well, I would say it's difficult. It will probably be difficult to maintain quality across that many books in the same setting, but we'll see. So thanks for watching.